Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Mark's Inspiration. It's dark here, so the lighting is not quite as good as usual. It kind of varies here, depending on what the day is like, because I have windows in here. Sometimes I can make it pretty good, and sometimes I can't. But tonight it's kind of so-so. But today we're going to continue with Coming Back Home, the true adventure of Mark Daniels. We are on Chapter 3, Show Me Love. Excuse me. Before we begin, smash that like button and subscribe. And if you'd like to get my help personally, you can contact me at my website, marksinspiration.com, or send me an email if you have a question or comment. Put your comments in the comments section. And if you'd like me to answer a question personally, I could make a show about it. If you have certain things you desire to know, I could speak about it here on the podcast or on the video. Either way, whatever you desire. Here we go. Show Me Love. Okay, Chapter 3. As I got older, between the ages of 5 and 10, I spent most weekends at my grandparents' farm. My parents would drop us off on Friday night, then spend the weekend drinking and dancing. The first time, I really didn't understand what was going on, like a dog dropped off at a boarding kennel. I was scared my parents were going to leave and never come back. Some of you probably can relate to that. But each time they did, and soon I grew to look forward to my time on the farm. I felt free. Excuse me. It was a true refuge for me. More than that, I loved being with my grandmother. She was the only adult in my life that I felt truly saw me and heard me. I could tell her how I felt, and she would never judge me for it. She never told me that I shouldn't feel a certain way. She never made me feel weak or disappointing. She would just listen and speak to me like I was a person. And isn't that what we all want? We all just want to be accepted for who we are. I think a lot about my grandmother, now as an adult, about the same age that she was when she would look after me. I appreciate her even more now, not only for what she did for me, but for who she was. She, more than anyone I met, had a kind and playful heart. We used to watch wrestling or Johnny Carson before bedtime. And once a year, we would watch The Wizard of Oz. That was one of my favorites. In the hottest part of the summer, she would sleep out in the yard with me where it was cool. I remember there was a particular tree that looked like Godzilla in the silhouette of the night sky. I still remember that. It scared me, but she would just hold me and tell me that I had no reason to be afraid. That tree is actually our protector, she would say. When lightning comes, it swallows it up and keeps it from reaching us. She would always tuck me in at night, and during the winter, she would shake the covers side to side so the static electricity would spark and shine in the dark of my room. Sometimes jets would fly over the farm, and she would watch them with me while they made their climbs and dives, rolls and banks. She knew I loved anything that flew. She flew kites with me and would make these little paper balloons that she would light on fire, and we would watch them fly up into the night sky until they burned out. Then we would sit and stare up at the stars and talk about what was up there, beyond the sky, at the end of it all. I so wanted to fly as a kid that I built a hang glider. It was really just a slap-together Frankenstein or of spare materials lying about the farm. But it was big and for the most part looked like a hang gliders I had seen on TV. But it didn't fly. No matter how fast I ran or how far I jumped down the small hills of my grandparents' farm, I just fell back to the ground. Every time I jumped, I saw myself for just a moment joining those jets and birds of the sky. How free they seemed to me. How far from the problems and the pain, the fear and the hurt. That's where I wanted to be. That's how I wanted to feel. I grew to love birds and rescued several from injuries over my childhood years. One in particular was a pigeon I raised from a chick. Its nest had been raided, but somehow it had survived. When I found it, it was just lying there cooing. Under my care, it grew into a full, healthy adult pigeon. It would follow me to school, flying from the top of one telephone pole to the next, then fly home with me when school let out. When we got home, I would open the door and it would fly right in. Like we were brothers who just happened to look different from one another. I loved watching the pigeon fly. I felt like I was flying with him, that I was free with him. One day I was playing in the street and he was with me. I don't even remember what we were doing, but I wish now that we hadn't been. A man drove by and we moved over to the side of the street like we always did. But at the last moment he swerved and ran over my pigeon. I can still see his face as clear as if it were yesterday. He was drunk. To this day I don't know if he swerved on purpose to hit the bird, a thing to do to feel in more control of whatever was troubling him in his own life, or if it was just the alcohol tossing his senses about. I've come to forgive that man, not for him or for my pigeon, but for me. I needed to forgive him so that I could move forward and stop feeling that pain. And it was my best friend he killed. But I resented him for a long time, for taking away my friend, for taking away my freedom. With the turn of his steering wheel, he taught me that not even flight could make you free. I could only tell my grandmother about the loss of that bird. If I had told my mom, she would have told me that I needed to stop crying and toughen up, like she had so many times before. My dad would have just laughed and made me feel ashamed of the love I had given a bird. But my grandmother listened. She would always listen. While my grandmother had a soft hand toward me, she was tough too. There were big black snakes on the farm. One time a 6-foot-long snake had come up onto the porch, and I watched my grandmother chase it with a hoe. She chased it to the edge of the kept part of the yard into the brush and killed it. I didn't like that she had killed it, but I knew she was doing it because she thought it would make me feel safe. I would find crickets in the yard or in her flower garden, and she would play with me. She didn't mind. She would play with them with me. She didn't mind getting her hands dirty, especially if it was to entertain me. But my grandmother had to be tough, I think because of my grandfather. He wasn't my real grandfather. I never knew my dad's father. This was the man my grandmother had married long before I was born. He was a gruff man, born in 1906, and a veteran of World War II. He had no children of his own, at least none I was ever told about. He was a farmer, and the farm was his. He was born there and had lived there his whole life. It wasn't a big farm, about 80 acres or so. On it he raised hogs, cows, and chickens, and he planted corn and beans. There was a pond that his family had dug sometime in the past, and a lake he had dug himself, but it never filled. It leaked out the side that faced a bluff, but it held just enough water for us to swim in it, or at least play in the mud. He never said much to me beyond the occasional grunt or command, so I always assumed he didn't like me, the way the rest of the adults in my life didn't like me, besides my grandmother, so I avoided him as much as possible. Some weekends, my cousins would stay at the farm, and we would all play in the mud, throwing mud balls at each other and making a general mess of ourselves. Unfortunately, one of the mud balls I threw had a rock in it, and it ended up cutting one of my cousin's heads. She was fine, but I hid the rest of the day, terrified of what my punishment was going to be. I didn't get caught, though I don't even remember now what the punishment I received. They all just ran together after a while. Punishment was a big part of my childhood, but the fear of punishment was even more so. One day I was out hunting on the farm with my single-shot .22 rifle. There were huge buzzards roosting in a dead tree, and I thought if I killed one, we could eat it just like a turkey or a chicken. I shot one and killed it instantly. Now you may find it difficult to understand, how could I have such an affection for so many little creatures and yet also enjoy hunting them? At one time, I'll admit as a young boy, I never really thought about that, but I did as I got older. It seems a contradiction at first glance, but the more I thought about it, the more I think it's only natural. Everything that lives dies, and everything only lives at the expense of something else's life. At its essence, that is just the transfer of energy from one form of life to another. I breathed a bunch of dust the other day, so I'm having a hard time talking. It's kind of taking my voice away. It's necessary and it's beautiful, at least to me it is. Hunting is quick: shoot, kill, clean, cook, eat. Energy given, energy received. It only becomes ugly when it isn't necessary or it is done in an unnecessary way. Torturing to kill, killing without the intention of eating. These things aren't beautiful. But going back to the buzzard, by the time I neared the house, kill in hand, I was excited. I thought my war-hardened grandfather would be proud that I shot and killed the bird in one try. And even more than that, I had brought home dinner. I was kind of ignorant about things like that at the time. I strode in through the kitchen door with my chest out and my chin high, holding out my prize. My grandfather looked up from a magazine at the kitchen table, and his face immediately changed from a mild annoyance to anger. "What the hell are you thinking?" he yelled. "Get that damn thing out of here and don't ever do anything like that again." I froze, confused and crushed. "Go," he bellowed. The dam of my emotions broke inside me. I ran from the kitchen through the backyard and back out into the woods, where I spent the rest of that day sobbing by myself. Man, this is tough talking today. No matter what I did, I wasn't good enough. No matter how I tried, I was not worthy of affection. I want to finish this chapter. I'll do my best here. I might have to get a drink of water. Later in life, I come to realize that there are differences between generations and the lives of those youths that color us, whether we would like them or not. My grandfather was a hard man because he had seen hard times, not just in war, but also from growing up with his parents. His life growing up on the farm was far more difficult than my weekend visits ever were. For him and his family, that was livelihood. That was the difference between eating and starving. That kind of life will leave you hard. He had hardships later in life also. He was out by himself once digging holes with his tractor and had an accident that left him with a leg broken in several places. Luckily, someone drove by and saw him. He was taken to a hospital to have pins put in his leg. They wouldn't let anyone under the age of 13 in to see him while he was at the hospital, but my father didn't care. He brought us in to see him anyway, and the hospital staff just allowed it rather than cause a fuss. And a fuss it would have been. My father was always doing things he wasn't supposed to. I wonder where I got that. Maybe from Dad. That's why my life has been somewhat of an adventure. One night after I'd gone to bed at my grandmother's house, my father came in unexpected. He had been out hunting and drinking with his friends. Two things he often mixed. It was late, but I was still awake. I cringed when I heard his truck pull up in the yard. "Boy, Mark," he shouted from the outside. The truck door slammed. "Mark, come and get this mutt before I didn't hear the rest. Mutt? My mind raced as I threw off my covers. We didn't have a dog. He wouldn't let us, though I had asked him 1,000 times. Had he hit one of the neighbor's dogs coming in? The thought terrified and excited me. Something to care for, something to nurture, something of my own. I ran barefoot through the house and put out into the yard. There was my dad holding a small puppy by his neck scruff. It was whimpering and wrestling in my father's strong, drunk hands. "Give him here, you're hurting him," I shouted without thinking as I ran from the porch. My dad recoiled, pulling the puppy high into the air, his eyes glowering down at me in the porch light. Then he swayed, and I realized his look was not of malice, but of confusion. He was too drunk, and I had spoken too fast. Understanding set in a moment later. He snorted and laughed like what I had said was the stupidest thing a person could say. Like a dog couldn't feel pain, or if they could, why would it matter? Because it was just a dog. I never hated my dad more than I did in that moment. In hindsight, I recognized there was something more in my father that night than just an indifference to a lower life. He had, after all, brought the dog home. Why would he do that if it was nothing? He dropped the puppy with a yelp to the ground and clumsily hoisted himself back into the driver's seat of the truck. "Take care of it," he said. As he slammed the door, then he looked back at me, "or I will." I knew what that meant. Don't worry, boy, I said, grabbing the little thing up and holding him close in my arms. I've got you now. Later, I asked where my dad had found the puppy. A hole in the woods, was all he said. It was an obvious evasion, but I didn't press. He had been sober but agitated about something. I worried he would turn back on his decision to let me keep the dog, so I contented myself that he was a dog from a hole in the woods. I never asked about it again. I kept him in my bed with me that night, and the next morning, as I knew she would, my grandma agreed that I could keep him at the farm. I would need to make regular visits to care for him, but he was welcome to stay. I'm going to try to finish this chapter. He was small, so I named him Itsy. From the moment forward, if I was at the farm, I was with Itsy. When I ate, he ate. When I went somewhere, he came with me. We explored together, hunted together, fished together. I even bathed him and tried to make sure he was a little burden to my grandparents as possible. I trained him too. He would heel, fetch, stay, sit, and come. Over time, he came to claim me as much as I claimed him. He would run up beside me and guard me if strangers came to the farm. He even snarled at my dad once when he was yelling at me. And I learned that Itsy had to be on a leash or locked in a room when I was being punished. That always made me feel good. I don't remember how long Itsy was on the farm. It might have been years or maybe only a few months, but I will always cherish the time I had with him. Not far up the road from the farm lived another family, a father and his 12 or 13 children. I never saw the mom. He was a drunk like my dad, so I felt comfortable going over there and playing with the kids. It felt like home, I guess. Itsy would always come with me, of course, and all the kids over there liked us. I think they saw me and Itsy as one person since we were always together. One day their coonhound attacked Itsy, and they broke into a fight that seemed to last forever. We did everything we could to get them apart, even sprayed them with water, but they just kept tearing each other apart. Blood was everywhere. They finally stopped on their own when neither had any energy left to maintain the fight. There was clearly no winner. Both were shredded from muzzle to tail. I was so afraid Itsy would not recover. He was my only true friend. What if he died? No one would understand how I felt if he did. To everyone else, he was just a dog, a mutt that didn't feel pain. To me, he was everything. I was so relieved when Itsy made a full recovery over the next week. But when I went back to my grandmother's house a few weeks later, he didn't come running up to see me. I rushed past my grandmother into the house calling for him, but he was nowhere to be found. My grandmother hurried in after me and found me in my room. She told me the news. He was gone and no one knew what had happened. I was devastated. In my mind, it was just another confirmation that I was not worthy of love. I had poured everything within me into caring for that dog, and it had left me. My grandmother held me while I cried. That was like her, always trying to take the hurt away. But my dad did something I never would have expected from him. He never acknowledged my pain from losing Itsy. No, that would have been too much. But when he picked me up from the farm at the end of that visit, he drove the other way to go home. When we came near the neighbor's house, he slowed down and swerved to hit the coonhound that had attacked Itsy. "Chase off our dog, you little shit. I'll fucking kill you," he screamed out the window as the dog snapped and snarled at his tires. He missed the coonhound and never hit him the few other times we drove by. When he tried the same thing, I don't think he really intended to. I think some small part of him had seen how hurt I was and wanted to make it better. He had said, "our dog." He had referred to Itsy like he was part of the family, and in some strange way that made me feel like I was part of the family. It was the first time I felt affection from my father, such as it was. It took a long time to recover from Itsy. He was my best friend. I come to feel a love for him more than anything up until that point. And for many years after, I had come to resent dogs. I felt he had abandoned me and it hurt so badly. I never wanted to feel that pain again. I never had another dog until I was 58 years old. And I guess I didn't, or got edited out, or I forgot to put it in there, but it may be later in the book, maybe. But actually what happened was we did find my dog. He was with a whole bunch of other dogs. It was kind of like a scene out of the movie. So I'm with my father. We were looking for my dog, and I seen him with like 7 or 8 other dogs across the field. And I got out of the truck and I called for him, and he started to come to me, and he got between the middle, he was in the middle of me and the other dogs, and he stopped after he started to come. He looked at me, he looked at the other dogs, he looked back at me, and then he went off with the other dogs. I never seen him again after that. So that was tough. I thought I put that in the book, but as I said, I haven't read this book yet, so it may be in there somewhere later on, but that pretty well sucked. That was my best friend. I'm sure if you've had a dog, you know how that feels. It's like you can tell your dog everything. But anyway, that's the end of chapter 4. We will start. No, that's the end of chapter 3. We will start on chapter 4 in the next edition, the series. And the title of that is Love Such as It Was. Okay, I'm going to go, and we will see you next time.